Hi everyone, it's Kendall here, and what I have for you today is a block tutorial for the Blueberry Orange Cake quilt from the Autumn Quilting with Wendy Sheppards book, which is linked in the description box below. But at the time of recording this intro, the Fat Quarter Shop was out of stock. As you can see on the wall behind me, I did already finish mine, and I decided to go with 16 blocks in place of 9 because I wanted it a little bit bigger. So without much further ado, grab your fabric, grab your pattern, come with me, and I'll show you how I do it. Alrighty, so this quilt does have a lot of pieces, but it's well worth the effort. And so on the board in front of me here, I have everything I need to make 16 blocks. Now, the original pattern only has 9, but I decided that I wanted a little bit bigger, and obviously I'm insane, and I decided to do 16 blocks. But throughout this tutorial, I will only be showing you one. We are going to start with the central leaf unit, and as I indicated just before, we're going to take all of the B squares. Now, these B squares are both in background and print fabrics, and we need to make half square triangles from all of these. So whatever number that you have, and I am going to be making quite a few because I want different fabrics and make a scrappy look to that central leaf. So just take all of the B squares, and they all need to be turned into half square triangles. And to do that, we draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of our background fabric. We match that right sides together with one of our print fabrics. We take it to the machine and we stitch 1/4 of an inch on each side of that drawn line. I like to then just give these a press first to settle down the stitches and ease any tension caused by sewing across the bias, before cutting them in half on the drawn line, either with a scissor or your rotary blade. We'll then press these to the darker of the two fabrics. Because these pieces are a little bit smaller, I am using my clapper to help set that seam, take the heat out of the fabric, and because the fabric has memory, it will stay nice and flat. Now, we do need to trim these down to their final size, and to do that, I grab a square ruler and I place the diagonal from that square ruler on the seam line. I then make sure that there is enough fabric outside the required trim down measurement, and you can see here in this instance that's 2 inches on all 4 sides, including under the ruler, before trimming those first 2 sides. I then rotate that around, and I can now line up that 2-inch measurement on those freshly cut sides, make sure that my diagonal or 45-degree line is still along that seam, and trim those final 2 sides. When I am working with half square triangles that are less than 3.5 inches, I do like to turn my little 3.5 inch square ruler into a makeshift block lock. And to do that, I just place 3 layers of painter's tape along that 45-degree line, and it does 2 things. As you saw just there, it butts up against that seam allowance so that you know you have a perfect placement and measurement, and then you can just, as you saw there, swoop the whole thing around once you're done and trim those final 2 sides. What it also does is, because that seam allowance creates a little bit of bulk and the piece is so small, without the painter's tape there, you will find that your ruler will rock and move, and so having those 3 layers of the painter's tape makes it about the same height as that fold over, and therefore you have less ruler slippage, and it makes trimming down these small half square triangles really easy. Now that we have all of our half square triangles made from our B squares, we need to sew all of them into pairs. So just grab random pairs and start sewing. you may or may not have noticed, because I did cut quite a lot out here because you don't need to see me sew all of these, that I questioned the orientation of the pieces that I was using. So always make sure to reference back to the pattern to make sure that you're sewing your pairs together correctly. Now what I like to do is my little snip technique. Whenever I sew half square triangles together, I tend to do this, and I snip into but not through the stitching line, and this allows me to move that seam allowance in the two opposite directions, and it just reduces all that bulk. You're not trying to press back against the bulkiness of the half square triangle piece on one side of it, and for smaller pieces like this, I just find that it keeps it a little bit more accurate. So as you saw there, I just put them in opposite directions before hitting them with the iron and pressing that all into place. Now I only need one pair to make one central unit, which is what I am doing in this video. And we also need to grab a few other pieces from our board or our previously cut parts, and that is our A background squares, our C background strips, and our D background strips. We'll also need to pull in all of the E print squares that we cut originally, and a selection of our A print squares to go on the C and D units as sew-and flips. For each of these central leaf units, we do need 3 of our print squares, A print squares, and one of them will get sewn to our half square triangle pair, and that will create the top row of this central unit. The C and D strips both need to get a sew and flip attached to the left hand side as it's sitting on the table in front of us here. Now, to get the right angle for our sew and flip, what I like to do is place that C strip horizontally on the table in front of me. That is the long edge towards your tummy. I always like to do my sew and flips up and in the right hand corner, and given that this is a rectangle, there is no right hand corner, but I'm putting the piece on the right hand end, and by situating it horizontally on the table to begin with, I will get the correct angle. I am going to use my folded corner clipper tool to do these sew and flips, as I always do. You simply place the tool on the smaller square with the measurements that are marked on there, making sure that everything is lined up along the bottom on that right hand edge and down that side of your smaller sew and flip square. You then take your rotary cutter and you slice away that fabric. We then take this to the machine and stitch our 1/4 of an inch, and you have a perfect-ish sew and flip every single time. We're going to repeat that process with our D strips, and once again, starting with it horizontally on the table in front of us and making sure that we're doing that sew and flip on the top right hand corner. Sometimes I don't always line up those markings as you saw before, but what I do is make sure that the diagonal line is going from corner to corner and slicing off the excess first. I do find that this makes my sew and flips a tiny bit more accurate, and I don't know why, because it's all the same markings on the same tool. But when I'm just randomly place it down like that, I don't really have to think about it. Just make sure that your diagonal is going corner to corner. The final piece we need to make for this is our little stem, and for that we need an A background square, and I'm choosing to do these sew and flips in the same fabric, but you could make it a different fabric if you like. So we're going to repeat that sew and flip process on our A background square by doing a sew and flip on 2 of the opposing corners, creating the stem unit for our central leaf block. You now just need to press all of those sew and flip corners out away from the background fabric, so towards the darker of the two fabrics in all instances. And you of course would do all of your D strips and all of your C strips, but as I'm only making the one block, I'm just doing the one lot. We're now almost ready for final assembly of this unit, but we just need to place our stem unit on the end of our D strip, and we will press that towards the background fabric, I believe. Yep. And now we just sew these 3 rows together. You should press all of your seams up towards the top of the unit, and you will need to make a total of 9. For each block we need to make 2 9-patch units, and for that we are going to use our A print squares. So I am just pulling out at random. I am pulling out 2 of each, and I have 16 fabrics, which will give me 32, and I only need 18. But we do need some extra A squares per block for our other half square triangle units. So I'm just pulling out 2 of each fabric at this time, and I'll create 2 random 9 patches, which will be sewn together following the 9-patch construction rules, which is sewing all of our vertical seams followed by our horizontal seams. For the pressing of these units, if you refer back to the pattern, the top row all gets pressed towards the right, the middle row goes towards the left, and the bottom row goes towards the right. Then, once we've done our final horizontal seams, everything gets pressed up towards that top row. You will need to make a total of 18 9-patch units. We now need to take a further 12 of our A print squares and arrange them in a step-like fashion. So a row of 2 and a row of 1, or a pyramid, but it's not really a pyramid because it looks like steps. We'll then grab in some of our previously cut F half square triangles. Now they were created by firstly cutting squares as per the pattern, and then cutting those squares once in half on the diagonal. We need 12 of those also to create these 3 pieced halves of our half square triangle. How you sew these together and how you keep up with where your fabric placement is a very personalised thing. You can watch through and see how I kind of do it. But with these also, the second row where we're putting one solid square to the triangle, I believe you press towards the triangle, and on the bottom row you press out away from the centre square on each side. Then we will join the rows together, and all of the rows, once again, like most of our others, all get pressed up towards the top. The footage of me sewing all 4 of these seems to have gone missing, so you will only see me sew the one unit, but you do need to make a total of 36 of these pieced half square triangles. You may or may not realise from the pattern, but the cutting sizes for these squares and half square triangles are very exact. There is no room to trim these blocks down. So your accuracy needs to be on point, but if you are a little bit off, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. We now need to bring in our G background fabric and cut that once on the diagonal. You could have already done this with all of your G squares. I just decided to do it as I went. And you will notice that this will match up exactly with the pieced half square unit that you've just created. And we'll sew our 1/4 of an inch. Now, taking care over at the machine not to stretch it or pull on it or anything, because you are stitching across the bias. Because we are also working with small pieces, and I should have mentioned this earlier, it is probably a good idea if you starch your fabrics, if that's something that you like to do. I haven't starched any of these fabrics as I'm okay with it and I trust my machine, but if you feel that you need to do that, you can. Once we've sewn this seam on, we will press out towards that background fabric. For each block you do need 4 of these pieced half square triangle units, which is why I stated before that you need to make a total of 36 of these. There's just one more unit we need to make for these quilt blocks, and that is our large stem. And for that we need our fabric H, which is our print fabric, and 2 of our fabric I squares of the background. These units are made by creating a sew and flip on 2 opposing sides of our large print square. And to do that, I will use exactly the same techniques as before with my folded corner clipper. You will need to make a total of 9 of these, and you will end up with 18 bonus half square triangles. Referring back now to page 12 of the pattern booklet for this quilt, we now need to lay this out in its final arrangement, which is a 9 patch. The little diagram there on page 12 also shows you the best way to press this block, in that the top row all gets pressed towards the left, the middle row goes towards the right, the bottom row once again towards the left. And once you've joined all of your horizontal seams, everything, just like we've done the whole way through this, gets pressed up towards the top. Now, you may find when you're doing this that some of your inner sections don't nest, and that's okay. It just means that you've changed the orientation of your block or something. And it is no big deal at the end of the day. As we fast forward all this footage, you will notice that I do clip seams sometimes, and you've seen me do that in other videos hopefully, and that just enables me to move the seam allowance in the direction I want it to go, to reduce bulk and control bulk. So it reduces it and controls it. So you tell the block which way you want to press it. Don't let the block tell you. So I'll just fast forward through all of this, and I'll be back with you in a moment. And voila, as simple as that, we have our block made, and for the complete quilt you do need to make 9. Alrighty folks, that does it for this video, and I hope I've helped you either make your decision to do this quilt, or as Pat has suggested, you could do any quilt that you want from this book. Once I got my hands on the Gratitude and Grace fabric, which is also linked in the description box below, I just couldn't wait to get this one made. So as I said, I did do 16 blocks instead of 9. I also changed up the size of the sashing and the inner border to still be able to do the scrappy border, and I finished it with a scrappy binding. Okay, if you haven't done so already, I'd love for you to like the video, share it with a friend that you think may be interested. You never know. Click that little subscribe button if you haven't already done so. It's free and really helps me out quite a lot. And I'll be having a 10,000 subscriber giveaway as soon as we get there. Once you have clicked that little subscribe button, don't forget to tickle the little bell icon, and then you will be notified of all my future releases and you won't miss a thing. That's it from me for now. I'll see you all again real soon. Bye for now.